These two topics will radically transform your nonprofit success rate. There are no two topics nearly as important as these for the nonprofit leader. And the two topics are self-discovery and self-care. And I've packaged these together because they're so deeply intertwined. Self-discovery is all about untying the internal knots that will keep you from success. And self-care is all about taking care of your number one asset, which is you. You can think of each this way. If you were a lumberjack, it would be important for you to, number one, understand your axe, right? How does it work? What are its weaknesses? What are its strengths? What does it do best? That's the self-discovery piece. And then number two, you'd want to sharpen your axe regularly, right? That's the self-care piece. Have you ever heard the story of the lumberjack competition? There were two lumberjacks who were in competition against one another to see who could cut down equally sized trees the fastest. Each had their own tree, and as the competition began, each began chopping away at his tree. But after 10 chops, one of the lumberjacks stopped to sharpen his axe. And the other lumberjack continued chopping, and the audience whispered, "Is he crazy?" Right? Talking about the lumberjack who stopped to sharpen his axe. Doesn't he know that he's going to lose if he stops? After sharpening his axe, the lumberjack started chopping again, but again, after 10 chops, he stops to sharpen his axe. And the other lumberjack, the one who doesn't stop to sharpen his axe, jumps out to a commanding lead, and he keeps chopping away. And over time, this process continues. The one lumberjack stops every 10 chops to sharpen his axe, and the other keeps chopping without stopping for anything. And here's what ends up happening. As the competition goes on, the lumberjack who never stopped became very tired, and his axe became very dull. Each chop was barely making a dent in the tree, all the while the lumberjack who stopped every 10 chops to sharpen his axe maintained strength, and his axe maintained its edge. And each chop splintered huge chunks off the tree. And eventually it was the lumberjack who stopped to sharpen his axe who cut down his tree first. Right? Of course, this is a fable, but a fable with a great moral. When it comes to accomplishing your nonprofit mission, you are your number one asset. And I know we all like to be humble and pass the honor to others, right? But in all seriousness, within your particular lane, you are the chief vision holder and the chief catalyst for progress. And that's all there is to it. If you don't keep the axe that is you sharp, you'll become exhausted, lose your edge, and stop making a quality impact. And unfortunately, the high majority of nonprofit leaders don't sharpen their axe nearly as often as they should. They have big hearts and big dreams, and they push themselves to the edge in pursuit of those dreams. Right? I know because I've been there. But before we jump too deeply into self-care, let's talk a bit more in detail about self-discovery. Again, self-discovery is all about untying the internal knots that will keep you from success. What are these internal knots, right? We all have them. It's a part of being human. Let me share a few of mine with you to give you some context. I was 27 when I started my nonprofit journey, and up to that point, I'd accomplished some pretty incredible things, but I'd never run a nonprofit before. And I was deeply insecure. I struggled deeply with imposter syndrome. Right? Webster's dictionary defines imposter syndrome as a psychological condition where someone doubts their abilities and accomplishments, fearing they'll be exposed as a fraud despite evidence of success, essentially feeling like a fake who doesn't deserve their achievements. Man, that describes me, right? I've felt this every time I've taken a leap of faith in my life. It's this thought loop that arises in my head when I'm out of my comfort zone that says, what am I doing? People are probably laughing at me or rolling their eyes at me. They think I'm stupid, immature, or silly. I'm no good at this. I'll never achieve the goal, right? And so on it goes. And if we're not careful, we'll buy into the lies of the imposter syndrome, and we will allow it to push us farther away from being effective, from success, and from our dreams. It's a scary thing to feel that vulnerable, right? Another thing I struggled with was fear of older men. I don't know if this was ingrained in me at an early age as a result of having a stepfather who treated me poorly, or if this was just something that I was wired with from the get-go, but I carried with me into my nonprofit endeavors a fear of saying or doing anything that might rub an older man the wrong way, right? Because I thought that he would blow up in anger at the slightest beginning of disagreement or conflict. And this caused me to water myself down in interactions with older men. I wouldn't shoot them straight or speak my mind, right? I felt like a little boy around them. Psychologically, I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet as an equal. And of course, this had a negative impact on my ability to stand firm and boldly project my vision and mission. And it also negatively impacted my ability to connect with people. You don't want people connecting with the watered down version of yourself. That's a false front, right? They're not truly connecting with you. They're connecting with a false image of you that you're projecting. This hampers the depth of connection that can be made, right? And successful nonprofit work is all about deep connection. Another thing I struggled with was a fear of failure, right? Up to that point in my life, I'd been fairly successful at nearly everything I tried. But as you know, nonprofit work will give you a taste of failure, right? I recall going into my first 100 or so fundraising meetings, shaking and sweating. I was so nervous. And I remember being in one meeting where, in hindsight, it felt like an out-of-body experience, right? And the people I was talking with seemed like Charlie Brown's teacher. You know, it was like, wah, 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 wah. I was so in my head. I wasn't listening to a word they were saying. I was worried about the ask and their response to the ask. I was worried about the outcome. I was a mess, right? And again, this kept me from being in the moment and connecting deeply with the people in front of me, which pushed me farther from success in the nonprofit world. I also struggled with being so worried about the opinion of others, right? I hated the thought of making other people feel bad. I hated shutting them down. I hated the thought of being perceived as arrogant or a jerk. I wanted to accommodate all people and thoughts, right? And while there's a lot of good in those intentions, as a nonprofit leader, you have to stand firm in the vision that has been placed on your heart. If you're a people pleaser, you and your mission are going to be pushed in a million different directions by people who don't hold the vision, right? And you'll spin your wheels in pursuit of your mission instead of making quality progress toward making it a reality. Another thing I struggled with was not wanting to feel like I was promoting myself or my nonprofit, right? I didn't like the salesy, scummy self-promotion that I saw in the world, and I didn't like feeling as if I was leveraging people to push my mission forward. And for me, it was like, I didn't get into nonprofit work to say, look at me or look at what we're doing, right? But I realized that I needed to promote if I was going to be successful. So I had to find a way to, number one, work through the internal challenges I had that were keeping me from this. And number two, to promote in a way that felt right to me. And here's another challenge I had. I've already mentioned this a bit, but it's worth mentioning again. I had a difficult time being straightforward with people. Again, I didn't like making others feel bad or wrong, and I didn't want to be or appear arrogant. I've always been the kind of person who listens more than I speak, and I'm still that way, right? But I've had to learn to speak my mind and stand firm in certain scenarios to ensure that the vision and mission were pushed forward. And here's another important note about my inability to be straightforward, right? This inability not only caused a lack of clarity, right, with me and other people, which is death to a nonprofit, but it also weighed on me, right? Somewhere inside, I would be thinking I should have been more straightforward. I should have said this or I should have said that. And this emotional weight would slow me down as I progressed toward the mission. Lastly, and certainly not least, I've always struggled with this deep belief that everything is going to fall apart. When I dive deep into myself, I see a lot of fear. I see a portion of me that is worried about social and relational issues. I see a portion of me that is worried about financial, physical, and material issues. And this fearful voice can get really loud at times. And although it still arises all the time for me, I know better than to listen to it now, right? But in my early days of leading a nonprofit, this voice was shouting all the time. And I had to learn to discount this voice. I had to learn to trust that everything was working for my good and the good of humanity, even when I wasn't striving, forcing, manipulating, scheming, and planning, right? I had to learn to slow down and be in the moment. And this fearful voice threatened to take me out of the moment at all times. I had to learn to disconnect from the results. I had to keep my eyes on taking the next right step and let whatever came after that come after that without thinking about it too much. And this has been a difficult challenge for me. Now, as relates to self-discovery, do you see how all of these things are deeply embedded internal issues? This is why I start with the self-discovery piece, because you can have all the best external nonprofit strategies, tactics, and tools, but if you don't untie these internal knots, it doesn't matter. You'll keep yourself from success. Let's turn now to self-care. As I said before, most nonprofit leaders do not sharpen the axe nearly often enough. We have big hearts and big visions, and we drive toward those visions until we can't anymore, right? We overestimate our capacity. We say yes to everything. We don't listen to our bodies, and so on. So the self-care piece is all about learning how to take better care of your number one asset, which is you. Again, let me share some of my challenges in this space to provide you with greater context. Early on in my nonprofit career, and still to this day at times, I didn't take nearly enough breaks and I didn't listen to my body. Right? I would not take bathroom breaks when I had to go, right? Somewhere inside I was thinking, I need to keep pushing just a bit more, right? And just a bit more turned into hours of not listening to my body. I also didn't spend nearly enough time discerning and becoming crystal clear on what lights my fire. In other words, what was I passionate about and good at within the context of my nonprofit? It's really important to become clear on this. And then once you've become clear on this, to spend as much time in that space as you can. The passion and energy that arises when you're operating in your wheelhouse spills over into all your other nonprofit endeavors and drives so much of your success. Here's a story to illustrate, right? Early on in my nonprofit career, I worked for an organization that did a lot of work in middle schools, high schools, and universities. And although it was the university level students that lit my fire, I spent a ton of time in middle schools. And if I'm being completely honest, middle school aged kids aren't my jam, right? I love them, but they're not my jam. And this is just a small example of the many things I was engaging in that didn't light my fire, right? In fact, many of them were like rain to my fire. Again, I had to learn what really made me come alive, and I had to maximize the amount of time I spent doing that and minimize the amount of time I spent doing the things that drained me. Another thing that I struggled with was not doing more of what I loved recreationally, right? I love walking. I love reading. I love a good book of depth. I love swinging on swings. I love playing my guitar. I love taking baths, right? There are many simple things in life that bring me great joy. But when I was in the midst of my early nonprofit career, I didn't engage in these things nearly as much as I should have. Part of this had to do with that incessant fear that everything was going to fall apart if I wasn't always pushing forward that I spoke of in the self-discovery section. I just couldn't seem to bring myself to take care of myself. I always put myself on the back burner. And I had to learn to do more of the simple things that I love. And eventually I got to the point where I do many of these things throughout the workday, right? Just to fill my cup and keep me in a good spot, to sharpen my axe. And beyond all of this, I was exhausted at the end of each day and had nothing left to give to my family. I didn't get into nonprofit work to give everything I had to my nonprofit and then to be a shell of a human being and avoid my family after I got off work, right? No, I got into nonprofit work to help the world, with myself and my family being at the top of that list. And to that point, this all culminated for me in inflammation in my body and migraines that would knock me out for 24 to 48 hours a couple of times per month, right? This was all a combination of the stress of work, my diet, my exercise plan, and my lifestyle, right? And my mentality that was fueling my lifestyle, which was all the direct result of the internal knots we've been speaking of and my lack of self-care. Okay, let's zoom back out to talk about both self-discovery and self-care. So much of this process of untying internal knots and taking care of our number one asset boils down to faith. It boils down to this deep-seated fear that things are going to fall apart if we don't keep pushing, striving, fighting, and clawing toward the goal, right? It comes down to our lack of belief in the idea that everything is working for our good and the good of humanity even when we stop working. And the only way to reduce the level of impact that this belief or lack of belief has on our lives is to take action in direct opposition to this belief. It is to begin to operate as if this fearful belief is wrong. It is to begin to operate in accord with the truthful belief that everything is working for our good and the good of the world around us, even when we stop working. All right, I'll stop there for now. I just wanted to paint a picture of the importance of self-discovery and self-care in the life of a nonprofit leader. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, share, follow, or subscribe. All of those actions help me reach more people with this message. And if you haven't already done so, join the Nonprofit Growth Mastery group that I run on Facebook. It contains other resources similar to this to help nonprofit leaders thrive and create thriving nonprofits. And lastly, if you're interested in diving deeper into the topics of self-discovery and self-care and truly making genuine, lasting, substantial progress in those realms and many others that are absolutely necessary for your success in the nonprofit space, check out my online course. You can find more information about this on our website under the Our Products section. The product is entitled Boom Package, which includes the online course, coaching from me, and an online community of nonprofit leaders who are traveling the same path as you, understand you, and can provide you with wisdom and encouragement as you seek to make your nonprofit dreams a reality. Otherwise, don't hesitate to reach out if I can be of service. Take care, friend.